33 people in the room.
Perfect way to start the show. Good evening and welcome to Flat Earth United. Joining me this evening, in case you haven't already guessed, is Tim Osman of Infinite Plane Society, who likes to start the show with 33 guests, so he says. How you doing, Tim?
Very well. Thanks for calling me on. I didn't know we were live yet.
No, the timing was absolutely perfect. I think it'll be the first thing that gets said, which is hysterical. So marvelous, perfect timing in every respect. So, yeah, I mean, I was going to carry on the conversation that we were just having about the billboard at the airport. So maybe we start there before we go into the actual subject matter of the hangout, because it was an interesting conversation that we were having.
Sure. So a couple of days ago, we were bouncing back and forth ideas. Actually, it was Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole had said something to me about his experience with marketing, and he was talking about how compared to all other forms of advertising, billboards are much more effective, like as much as 75% more effective in terms of market saturation when it comes to a certain area that's been exposed to the ad. So it's better than print ad, better than radio, the billboard. So I brought it up on the live chat, and I'm like talking about the idea of somebody going around and researching and finding, hey, where are the billboards at that we can afford? We can raise some money for it. So thedailyplane.com, another YouTube user and a fellow member of the Flat Earth Associated Press, along with the flatearthreport.com that I run, he did some research, and he found that outside the Philly airport, they have a digital billboard. They said over the course of a week, it'll have something like 10,000 times it'll show up. They said 340,000 views is expected per week or something. And it's like 800 or 900 bucks a month. So we crowdsourced it. And then last night, we actually raised enough money for it. So there will be a flat earth billboard outside of the Philly airport.
Do you think the next step will be to start using some of their tools against them and subliminally planting the Helen sex cell into these adverts as well, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the viral potential for something like this, because how many people are going to be taking pictures in front of it? And I'm thinking you're just getting off a plane, especially if you're someone who doesn't travel every day. But your first time, you just spent the whole afternoon looking across the tops of the clouds. You didn't see any curve. And so they're going to be a little suggestible. So I think it's the perfect place to put one.
Yeah, I agree. And as you said, I mean, I'm paraphrasing what you had said, but we are using their tools against us. I mean, I joke about using the Helen death cell, but no, I think that's absolutely something that we should do. And why not? It's guerrilla tactics. Why not? You know, if we're going to be bombarded with hell and death cell for the globe, why not use it against it to get the actual truth out? It seems reasonable to me. Maybe not. Maybe we'll say not fire with fire. We'll see what the chat has to say, but I don't know. I think it's perfectly acceptable to use their own tactics against them. That's what you do in war.
And exactly. And then I'm finding these chats are very useful for how they become a think tank, and these ideas come out and people put their resources together, because I wouldn't have had enough time to search this out. And so it's actually becoming a useful organizational tool. And since it is kind of guerrilla, we don't have their big budgets, but when enough people put their heads together and they want to see something happen, everyone chips in, it happens. And so it's kind of nice to see that we can launch a project this fast. I mean, it took less than 2 or 3 hours to actually get it to be fulfilled. Ace McLeod in the comments says that I'm a shill. Yeah, thank you. I am a shill. I'm a shill for the truth, along with
Ace
Nathan
is
Oakley.
interesting because Ace originally had an idea to try and take away the sting of people quoting the word shill or to all and sundry without actually. Oh, Siri's popped up at the word shill. So yeah, Ace's original idea was to actually try and defuse it by calling literally everyone a shill, even just without exception. Small child, you're a shill, doesn't matter. So it sort of took away the sting. So that's Ace's bag as far as I can tell.
My take on the shill thing is that even if 1 in 10 of the people in this YouTube community, in the chat rooms, content creators, even if 1 in 10 are agents or shills, whatever you want to call them, it's not going to matter. There aren't enough of them to go around. All these live streams that we have all night, I'm seeing it. It's just they don't have the resources to keep up with us anymore. And that's why it's important to get outside of YouTube, because they concentrated here, and now the dam's breaking, and now we're in the streets more and more frequently. So I think instead of calling shill, focus on getting the message out and getting enough people in here that we can drown the shills out. All these scared little church ladies running around, that the slightest, hand sign, they start freaking out.
Yeah, that's another one that people do deliberately as well. And I don't know if that necessarily has the same effect. If you pull a 666 hand sign in jest or not, it will get picked up on and pointed out. And I don't know. Do you think it's a bit of a farce, the whole hand sign thing?
No, it's actually. I think it's consistent. I think it is a real thing, but it's. I don't really take it that seriously, except if it's like in a purposefully staged, like an interview, where it's part of their language. It's part of their. It's kind of like a formal ritual setting could be carried out in public if you don't know what to look for. Because I saw this before. I pointed it out in an old video where it was just from a few months ago. Stephen Colbert, he brought on Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I saw him do these gestures that the average person's not going to see anything, but if you're an insider or you're initiated into the Masonic Lodge, you would recognize what he did, because he did the left hand down, right hand up, swearing, and then he dragged his hand across his neck twice, and then they did the 5 points of contact Masonic bro hug. Like, you kind of see this stuff, and they do in fact use it, but I think people kind of they kind of jump the gun a little bit sometimes.
Well, it's a tricky one to explain, because you're obviously going out there on a limb and saying the whole religion thing is a nonsense. It's part of the paradigm. It's part of the control structure. It's there to keep you in check. But at the same time, you've got people. Dave Weiss recently shared an interview with me for a Caravan to Midnight interview about satanic ritual abuse, and the woman whose name I forget, apologies, but the person who was being interviewed, the lady, was explaining that this was a generational thing, and she was essentially a fourth generation individual who'd been subject to this ritualistic satanic abuse. So it's hard to explain to an audience that yes, absolutely, there are Satan worshippers, there are people who absolutely believe in Satan, but that doesn't mean he's real. It doesn't mean that the stuff that happens in his name isn't real either, but that's kind of a hard message to get across because it's so convoluted.
Well, I happen to think that I think you're referring to Kathy O'Brien. A lot of these people who ran the Satanic Panic were actually, like, even what's the guy, Ted Gunderson. They're disinfo agents, and they're trying to get you to play into the black and white Hegelian dialectic, God versus Satan, so they can scare you back to God that they control, because it's the state-controlled God of the mainstream organized religions. The truth is, the elite don't worship Satan. They're polytheistic. They worship Jesus, Jupiter, Venus, Apollo by other names. But they want you to think it's God versus Satan, so you run back to them. It's an old trick.
Sure, but it's like I say, it's hard to explain that to somebody if they can just go and immediately reference a video that shows satanic abuse, because then the abuse is real, Satan isn't.
Well, the abuse is being done in the name of, like, if you actually read some of the very disturbing accounts of the victims of clergy abuse, it's done in the context of being the love of Christ being inflicted upon them. Like, they don't invoke Satan when they rape these kids. They do it for Jesus. It's sick, I know, but that's what they do. It's got pederasty at its core. That's how they roll. It's Rome, ancient Roman culture, and they never changed, they never reformed, and they never started respecting people. It's still the same culture of slave-owning parasites who pose as gods and want to rule over an ignorant slave class.
Well, this is the crux of the show. Perfect segue. Thank you very much. So I came to not a realization, but a sort of an idea, which I put in the little advert, which you already know, but I'm speaking to the audience, about the idea of people like Dr. Xavier, or for people who are a little bit older, maybe, although Dr. Xavier is still pretty old, he's in comics, but yeah, but going back a little bit further, you have Doctor Who, which you did a little video on recently as well, IPS, and these wheelchair-bound, mind-controlling doomsayers, as you would call them, maybe you'd phrase it better than I did, but are loosely related, or maybe not loosely related, to a lot of the characters, shall we call them, that are presenting us with the heliocentric lie or deception. Whether they know or not is a different matter, but that's not necessarily part of this subject. But it would seem that there are strong parallels between the science fiction and the reality, in the same way as we have with anything from NASA. You know, you have the science fiction version in Star Trek, and then you have the reality version in NASA. The reality being that both of them are actually fiction. And I think the same is true for people like Stephen Hawking. So maybe if we start with Stephen Hawking and Xavier, and then from there work our way through the entire timeline. So one from the beginning deception through to what we have now, if that makes sense. That's a bit of a
Yeah,
mouthful.
actually, and I have a new piece of information that I think everyone here will appreciate regarding this subject. So we're talking about how people think that entertainment is separate from media and that the government is separate from the media. But no, they're all intertwined. I call it the government media entertainment complex, the GEM. And the way I explain it is that when the government has an agenda, first they put it in the entertainment so it gets into the culture, gets in your mind. That's the predictive programming. Then they use the media to introduce it as a real thing, whether it's a school shooter, global warming, some type of psyop, or even an archetype, a character, a politician who was represented as an archetype in the media. And this is Stephen Hawking. And then they use it to advance a governmental agenda. So in Hawking's case, you had various wheelchaired, physically impaired geniuses that were just like cold, calculating, scientific, and they were just paragons of objectivity, like super intelligent brains on a life support system. So you had Captain Pike, and then you had the other guy from Doctor Who. What are those ones called? From Doctor Who, that's like the wheelchair guy with
Well, it's Davros that's the actual character that's
Davros.
like the
Okay,
leader.
so Davros, Captain Pike, and then you had Professor X. Same archetype, right? So here's what I'm saying: they build these archetypes in the minds of the masses, hitting the different generations. You have all been exposed to this archetype, and then they introduce it to you in the media in the form of someone who embodies the archetype, such as Stephen Hawking, who happens to be advancing big government agendas, depopulation, fear of asteroids, the whole heliocentric system. I call him a New World Order sock puppet, an animatronic doomsayer. He's a PR front for big daddy government. And here's how the system works, though. There's a trick to it. I have a link here for you. Go to wikipedia.org/transference, and it talks about how they can psychologically transfer. It's like archetype transference is another one. It's Carl Gustav Jung talks about this, where if they can create this archetype in your mind and you emotionally resonate with it when you're young, you will transfer those feelings to someone who embodies it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. You get them while they're young, basically. It's the same principle with the globe. This is why I like the subject. It seems like there's a hell of a lot of parallels here.
Yeah, exactly. And so what I'm posting a link in the comments. It says Transference and Archetypes by Carl Jung. And it's a little clip there. Excuse my spelling. What it's basically showing is that they're doing this intentionally. So they're engineering these characters that specifically that they're going to introduce later on purpose. So Stephen Hawking was basically put there after they had already sowed the idea that this is the archetype that you can identify as someone to trust, someone objective, someone who's guiding humanity. And that's how they've propped him up. He's like our prophet. He is a prophet. If you think about the things he says, like 2 days ago, Stephen Hawking predicted that if the human race doesn't clean up its act in 100 years, we're all going to have to leave the earth. We're going to go extinct. I mean, how sick is that?
Yeah, typical doomsaying. What is it you call it? Futurism.
Jesuit futurism is the word I would use, yeah, where it's a doomsday prophecy. All these second coming stories, just so people know, your pastors are lying to you if they say it's in the future, because they took the Jesuits in the 1500s, they took the old book of Revelations that was about something that happened at the inception of Christianity, and they pushed it into the indeterminate future to use it as a common scare tactic to keep people in line. The same way that Al Gore can always talk about global warming. It's all about the government having a big threat to hold over your head. And they just found, hey, it's useful to control people when they're scared. So let's tell them, look busy, Jesus is coming, and condemn the other sinners. Self-police, you don't want to bring down the wrath of God. And that's why you have all these busybody, mean green types telling everybody else to watch their carbon footprint. It's the same disease, the same sickness.
So, and it's the same story as the Avengers. You know, you've got. I'm not a big comic book fan, but I've got a vague idea of these people named. But you've got the god of the underworld, or whatever you want to call him, the most powerful guy of all, Kronos, who's coming back. Essentially, like you're saying, keep yourself busy because this guy will come and take you out if you're not. And then you've got Nick Strong, who's running. I've forgotten the name of it. Shield. The guy with the one patch. And these are all archetypes for people who are like running the army, running the government. They're the same thing. They're running the defense network for Earth against a god. You've even got Thor in there. Thor is part of the gang, which just blows your mind. It's so useful that Thor's now in current mainstream, whatever you want to call it, superhero films, because he perfectly links this back to maybe Thor's not quite as ancient as I'm thinking he is, but it's a nice circle to show you the old way of doing it right up to the modern way of doing it.
Well, that's why I wanted to talk to you is that this system, this blueprint they have of creating, you're using archetypes and then aligning leaders with the archetypes. That's the basis of how they deify the ruling elite. This has been done since the beginning. That's how you have the Pope being the vicar of God. And so what they're doing is they're just using modern archetypes, namely these very popular superheroes, and they're using the archetypes in order to get things into the public mind so that they can be plugged in, so those archetypes can be transferred later. So this will even help you make a lot of sense out of some of these bizarre instances where people seem to take on different identities later. Like hypothetically, if it is true that we'll say Alex Jones is Bill Hicks. I know people hate to hear that, but let's say it was true. And I'm trying to think about how would something like that make sense? Well, maybe this character that they built up that people related to that tapped into a certain demographic, they wanted to transfer that to this particular ideologue that they were going to introduce. Do you see what I mean? This
Yeah,
this this idea of transferring, and I can name a weirder example. It's just kind of off the rails a little bit, but there's this bizarre conspiracy theory that Christopher Reeve, who played Superman, didn't actually fall off his horse, but that he instead got a really blotched nose job, just a big old ridge put on there, gained a lot of weight, and he came back as the man bear pig. So this theory is that they introduced Christopher Reeves as Al Gore. And so people say that's absurd. And then you look at the pictures and you're like, okay, well, I can see how this could have been done, but why? And I'm saying it's because he embodied the archetype of Superman, people related to his kids, and they transfer the archetype to the man who's going to save the world from global warming, from all the evil polluting capitalists and their toxic sludge. They even carry all the storylines forward, and it's all about transferring the archetype. And I think that since politics and entertainment and Hollywood, it's all the same thing, it's the same system, it makes sense if you look at it in what I call archetype casting. It goes one step beyond just typecasting an actor for a role. Archetype casting means they have to embody the archetype that the public has already been inundated with so that they unconsciously transfer those emotions to the type that fits the archetype.
I mean, the other thing that comes to mind in terms of the why is it because there's just not enough of them? In other words, there just simply aren't enough people in elite positions to control us. Obviously, we vastly outnumber them. So is that why they would recycle these individuals, in your opinion?
You know, I thought so because that's one less pair of loose lips to watch over. Secrecy, keep it all in the family, multiple roles. It's people just like it makes a lot of sense, but I think there is something about archetypes that they do know how to operate with. And this is an old thing they've been doing forever. And you see it with all of the various celebrities. I call it Hollywood archetype casting because I've been observing this for quite a while. And
right, explain what you mean. Stereotype, archetype. What's the difference?
Okay, yeah, like an archetype would be something a little more universal, like a mother, versus like a stereotypical Jewish mother or a stereotypical black mother. No, the archetype mother is a little bigger than a stereotype. It's like the one. It's more like Platonic idealism. It's the definitive one, and these are archetypes that are said to be, just basic. Only I would say they're built into our consciousness, like they're part of us. Like we all have these archetypes that are part of your life as a human being, no matter what you do. Like you have, and it's going to vary a little bit, but there's certain feelings that we all have in common. We all have hatred, we all have rage, we all have mothers, and so we've all experienced these archetypes in different forms. And so the elite know that if they can create that feeling through their pageantry, their movies, their stories, and they can get you to relate to certain archetypes, that they can bring out leaders that match the archetypes and cause you to relate to them in the same way. And I'm seeing this done. This is how this whole idea of this deified elite they've always associated themselves with sun gods. And one way they would do it is spread stories. So for example, Vespasian Flavius, the father of Titus Flavius, he was said to be able to cure the blind with his spit, just like Jesus did 30 years later. He was said to heal the lame and cure the lepers and all that. And so these are old myths about healing, that if you're a sun god, you can do these things. These are like his miracles, like Superman had miracles, right? And so the way these leaders would convince the public that they were in fact godlike beings worthy of worship is they would spread these myths or rumors or stories that they could do these things. And they'd have shills claiming that it was true. there's been a long history of kings with healing hands and the ability to cure the people, and it's all fraud. It's just to trick the superstitious, brainwashed people into overvaluing how great their leaders are because they're just human beings.
Sure, and there's a huge amount of power that's held by some of the actors. So if you were in these positions of authority, creating the narrative, you would want to control the people who are putting it out there because you don't want them to be, as you put it, loose-lipped. And it's important that people understand that. I'll take this back a step because I had a conversation with Gem Panda, and this will put it into context. So he was explaining that he had debunked the video that was called "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon," which I don't necessarily take as evidence. I just see it as TV propaganda, the same as the stuff from NASA. But because that's packaged from the same people, on the same source, on the same TV, to the same general public, as a conspiracy theory, Gem Panda, or Jeremy, feels that it's perfectly acceptable to debunk that because it's framed as a conspiracy. Whereas NASA has got the word live or it's got the word real or whatever, it's framed as being absolutely legitimate. So in the minds of most people, there's no need to debunk that. You've got the legitimate stuff, but you're dealing with something called the suspension of disbelief. If you actually were to take what they present on the ISS in isolation and look at it, you would never believe it. But for the fact that you've had all of the predictive programming and all of these archetypes like Superman, like Batman, like Spider-Man, like whoever, put into your mind so that when you see somebody who has a similarity, you will immediately make the connection. It's not a stepping stone. It's not a barrier to you recognizing their abilities. And abilities is something that the superhero incarnations of these people have got in abundance, and we as mere men do not. However, we have huge amounts of abilities, which is why they have to do all of this. Again, this is getting very convoluted, but hopefully everyone's keeping on track.
Sense. And like I say, they do it intentionally. So it is not a coincidence that Bill Nye the Science Guy looks just like Captain Spock. They create these associations intentionally because they know you are raised as Spock. You see Spock, you think, that's the smartest guy in the room. That guy's impartial. That guy doesn't have any political bias or agenda. He's all about the info. He's a human computer. Then they bring out Bill Nye. He tweezes up his eyebrows, waxes him, whatever. He kind of has this elfin appearance. He even flashes the Vulcan hand salute. And that process of identifying Spock with Bill Nye is unconscious. You don't even think about it, but it's there. And until someone calls it out, you might not even recognize it. And this is not coincidental. They do it on purpose, and they build up archetypes in advance. I've even caught instances of them doing this with politicians where they introduce a character first so that when the politician comes out, you have an idea of you already associate them unconsciously, and then they can drive the point home by pointing out the similarities for good or for ill.
And they do the same exact thing in the Bible. So you've got the allegorical stories, which nobody's ever going to take as actually happening. They use to make a point, and then you have actual events. And it's no different for what we have now. The TV is now our Bible. It's the means, it's the tool that they use to control us in the same way as text. You go on about the movable print text, the typeface. Get it right in order, the movable typeface printing press. There we go. That was exactly the same principle as we have now with the TV and the internet, and they are absolutely and totally controlled by the people who, not surprisingly, want to keep us under control. So when we talk about stories from the Bible, our stories now are Godzilla, Superman, Batman, everything you see on TV. That's the same. How did you phrase it? The government media
entertainment complex, or GEM, government entertainment media.
Yeah, it used to. I mean, Thomas Sheridan would refer to it as the entertainment matrix, or the entire thing, including billboards, newspapers. That would be the matrix as a whole, because all of these things are utilized for the same purpose. So if it's an advert for a TV show on Sky, it will have the subliminal programming as part of that show, mainly to get you to watch the show, admittedly, not necessarily to program you with globes, because that's already a given. That's already done. But in other words, you're being bombarded with this from every angle. But our current text, our current God, is the Bible. We've got the Manchester attack, and at the moment, I've got a daughter, and we went to a Gymboree class, and they had a minute's silence in the middle of the class. And I'm rolling my eyes for obvious reasons, but that is essentially people's God. The God of your world says this happened. Do not question it.
Yep. And I think it's important to draw the parallel because the idea of the Reformation was just that they controlled the mainstream media narrative of the day by keeping the Bible in a language that only the elite knew and the poor weren't allowed to know. And so it gave them a lot of power. So the Reformation meant people could actually read it. It's catalyzed by the movable type press, and it changes the dynamic. And so right now, as you said, we might as well say that the reality filter of the day, the Bible of the New World Order religion, is the TV. It's the media, the globalist media. But what we're doing when we're analyzing psyops and criticizing their roles and their acts, like we make fun of Robbie Parker and all these others and how fake it all is. Well, what we're doing is we're translating their Bible into the Vulgate, and we're distributing the information out there and changing the balance of power again, because we're no longer giving them the power to define the narratives that define the parameters of our lives. And so I'm calling this a new Reformation, and that's why I'm encouraging people to become content creators, because we have to speed the process up so that they can't stop it.
And also recognize the other parallels. I mean, you've mentioned Neil deGrasse Tyson and people of that nature already. They're the new priests. You know, these are the people who tell you what's what, and you're not to question them as individuals. They are, what's the word? Infallible? Is that the right word?
Yep, infallible.
Yeah,
And yeah, the Pope was actually considered infallible for a long time, and I think they kind of changed things. The church is like excellent for camouflaging itself. It knows how to hide itself. Its true nature. So, like if you went to the church in the 60s or 50s rather, the priest would have his back to you. The women would have their hair covered. It'd be read in Latin, and every Easter they would pray for the deceitful, perfidious Jews, and they would still have it official dogma that the Jews incarnate the body of Satan collectively, and that they still need to compensate or say they're sorry for killing Jesus. Like the Catholic Church was actually officially and dogmatically anti-Jew until the 60s, before they became very, Vatican II, very open and liberal.
Amazing. I said at the beginning that we've gone all around the Rican. I'm hoping to bring this into a line now, so we actually, or you more accurately, because I can't do this. This is why you're here. But yeah, so explain the path. You've done this many times on your show, but the sort of the starting point of where they lie, the Apollo and the lights in the sky, basically, and how the individuals who are on the ground are deified. Or this is something maybe you can explain better than me, but anthropomorphized versus deified. Where's the difference?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, what I'm saying is this: is that they claim that leaders are deified, and they have myths to explain. Like this one is born of this god, and they have different ways of writing themselves into the myths. And today the elite are trying to use the ancient alien stories to give themselves an in, to convince us that there is a royal bloodline. But that's the big trick. There are no royal bloodlines. That's like one of the biggest hoaxes out there. But the other end of it, the anthropomorphizing of government. This is what it is. Like we all know what Big Brother is. Big Brother is the embodied or the nanny state. You're anthropomorphizing government, putting it into a figure like a mommy or a daddy. And we do that derisively, but that's truly what they want you to do. The transference I talked about, archetype transference. Well, every child has a mother and a father archetype, or they relate to it as like a god. And you have siblings, you have the whole family, you have the elder. And so what they have done with the astrotheological cult is they have taken the son, who's the sun god, the father, the king of heavens, who's Jupiter. You have the wife, who is Isis or Venus, the goddess, and then you have grandpa, who's Saturn. So you have this like family unit built into this astrotheological myth. And what they do is they anthropomorphize it by bringing them down to earth and saying, oh yeah, your ruler is an embodiment of the sun god. And so what you do by making this claim is you're having not just Big Brother, but the entire family unit. And this is important when you have a totalitarian state with no nuclear family, where the state raises the kid cradle to grave, like Brave New World, Plato's Republic. This is their ideal. Their ideal totally controlled state means no nuclear family, and instead you allow that transference, that emotional bond, to form with the government. And this is the basis of state-olatry and worshiping the king, worshiping the father figure, wearing the big hat and the scepter and all that. It's all a trick. It's a way of farming human beings by playing upon our psychology and our natural way of bonding. with the parental figure. That's why when you say sucking at the teat of government, well, that's pretty much what they're doing. And the government wants you to be childlike. Like even in the Christian church, they talk about you must be childlike, and then they call the priest father, and you have the sacred mother. And this system isn't coincidental. It's consistent everywhere it's used. It's a blueprint, a template for controlling masses of slaves. And so you get them all to worship Big Daddy government, Big Mama government. You have the example of North Korea, where the kid is the sun god. They call him like the sun. They celebrate him on all the solar holidays. His mother's called the Sacred Mother. And when his father was born, they said he was born in a manger and a new star appeared. And when he died, they put up 3,200 obelisks all over North Korea to symbolize that he's immortal. And then the very founder of that present dictatorship changed his name to Il-sung, like the sun. Like what I'm saying, they took the Roman imperial cult, where sun worship was the official state religion, and they implemented it in North Korea and created a pharaoh, a royal bloodline. Now that guy's royal, and any of his kids are going to be royal, and they're just going to be said, that this is the whole myth, is that the father is reborn again and again as a son. So every succeeding person is the God incarnate, the vicar of Christ.
This is how people should realize how this is being done, is to look at North Korea, because it's not comical, because it's actually happening, but it's easy to see it when it's not you, when you're not being subject to it. So rather than, it's hard to say, let's all look at North Korea as an example, but it's a good one, because the people who are trapped on the globe, they can look into that and say, well, that's nonsense. I would never believe that. And it's like, well, no, every single person in Korea, I've been there, they all believe it. They're totally bought in. But in the same way we would say the globe heads are totally bought into Big Daddy government and the globe.
Absolutely. And when you look at read the book 1984, you'll see what it is, because the idea of a total state or utopia means totally controlled. And it's these societies, they have it down to a science. Like if you read any of these defectors from North Korea, they will talk about how it takes them years to get rid of this idea that the dictator can still read their minds. And those of you who are raised in a religious household, maybe if you're a Catholic, you might have experienced this, where you felt like God was reading your thoughts and you could be punished for your thoughts, because they implant like internal controls. They implant this idea of crime stop, is what they call it in 1984, where if you have a thought that might contradict what Big Brother thinks, you have this internal block that stops it from happening. And Christianity does the same thing. All these religious systems do. All the Abrahamic faiths make the point that God can read your mind, and even having a lustful thought is as bad as cheating on your wife, which to me makes me think, well, maybe might as well do it then. But they implant this in your head, and people leaving cults have the same issue. Because you have to remember that when we're talking about the subject, we're talking about the cult of government worship. They call it a cult of personality in North Korea, but it'd be more accurate to call it an imperial cult.
And back to mind reading, we've covered this already, but we've got Dr. X, Xavier, who's a mind reader. That's his primary function, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of these things these archetypes do, like Professor X, is he's the one who finds the people who are above average, the mutants, the ones who are going to advance humanity to the next level. And so it's this idea too that the guy's a prophet. And that's one of the points. If you look at any Stephen Hawking, he's telling us what's going to happen in 100 years. I mean, Al Gore can't tell us what the weather's going to be tomorrow. No one can. But then they claim to tell us, oh, in 20 years, the temperature is going to go up this much, we're going to lose this much ice, and this many baby polar bears are going to drown. So therefore, you must give me this much money. As though they have a thermostat at the UN, and you give them $1 trillion, they'll turn it down a degree. It doesn't exist.
I'm going to correct you there. I wouldn't normally correct a guest, but I've got Stephen Chess in the chat. Hello, Stephen. And you say no one can predict the weather. Stephen Chess can. He's done it consistently for months, and I've tried to convince him to log it, and he's just not interested. He's kind of almost bored of it, but he likes the idea of people going out and discovering this stuff for themselves, as opposed to sort of spoon feeding it to people with logs and proving it and arguing about whether or not what he's discovered is correct. But it's an interesting one. The reason I bring him up is because after I made the little not a trailer, but an explanation about, I think I called it heliocentric gods in that one, as opposed to heliocentric heroes. in that, I said, I don't know where Spider-Man fits in. And of course, Stephen Chess was the first to point it out. He's like, well, no, he's part of the press, same as Superman. You know, and that's important again. That parallel. You know, the guy who's saving the world works for the newspaper. Not only does he work for the newspaper, he's under the heel. Both of them, Superman and Peter Parker. Peter Parker's the better example because number one, he's everyone's favorite. Everyone loves Spider-Man. But with Peter Parker, he's going out, saving the world, clearing up the mess, dealing with the criminals, generally a good guy, and he's one of the people, he's one of us. But he takes his photos and immediately discredits himself by handing them over to the newspaper, and he carries on with this. The abusive relationship. I've forgotten the term. You'll know straight away what I mean. But the going back to the abuser.
Oh yeah,
that's
battered wife syndrome.
Battered wife syndrome. That's it. He's going back to the beating husband. You know, the paper, and every time he submits the pictures, oh please, can't you just say, look, he was trying to save that woman. No, he was robbing her. Out they go. And he falls victim to it every single time. And that's an important message to get across to us. The newspaper's always going to have the last say.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. You got Clark Kent with this double identity. He works for the paper, so he helps construct the narrative, and they're all about controlling people's minds, concealing things, hiding things. Kind of interesting. Little interesting subtext going on there. But yeah. I didn't catch that. That's a good catch about Spider-Man because I was thinking about that.
Yes, X Stranger XX or Stephen Chess. Yeah, he's about as
but
cool.
No, I've seen this process in politics as well. For example, when thankfully his name doesn't immediately crop to mind because I hate this guy, but Ted Cruz. When Ted Cruz started running for, I guess, the primaries to be the presidential candidate for the Republicans, I noticed a few things. I noticed his vernacular. He was using words that I haven't heard since George Herbert Walker Bush. He would say things like, that wouldn't be prudent. He used the same tone. He used the same body language. And I thought about it, and I was like, he must be getting backed by the Bushes because he is literally imitating the tone, the posture, the rate of speech, and the vernacular of George Herbert Walker Bush. And then I looked at Trump. Trump was using Reaganisms, even using the same slogans. I mean, Make America Great, again, was originally Make America Great. Same platform, reaching the same people, and using a lot of the same words, the same verbiage. And then the same arguments were used against him. He's just an actor. You can't take him seriously. And anyway, my point is that politicians will consciously mold themselves off of successful politicians of the past and try to carry it forward, or they'll adopt a persona that matches somebody popular that they want to be associated with. Like, so for example, I was noticing for a long time Will Smith. I believe that Will Smith was being used to get everybody ready for Barack Obama and to relate to Obama as the way they relate to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the same character. They identify with these characters. And they made the associations when Barack Obama was introduced to the public. A lot of people were saying that if anybody is going to play Barack Obama in a movie, it's going to be Will Smith. And then you'd see pictures of them hanging out together. Not a coincidence. This is the archetype transference that Carl Jung talks about. And the elite do it all the time. That's why when they bring out somebody new, you got to look at how they were represented in the media, because that'll tell you who they are, I think.
See, that's interesting. I didn't see that. I'm such a not a TV watcher, but I was always drawing the parallels between Obama and Nick Fury because he was actually in the cinemas at the time or during his tenure. So you've got Nick Fury, who's, he's running the secret army, if you like. But that's, to me, that was about Obama. That was his character. But maybe it's just because he's black, because obviously Obama doesn't.
Oh no, you're right. They'll fuse him. Listen, I mean, they fused. Okay, because they custom tailored the gods. And so when they introduced the Christ figure, they made him someone who fulfilled all of the Jewish myths and then did all the miracles expected of a sun god like Dionysus, turning water into wine, a Saturn sun god, god of harvest, multiplying loaves, the sun god Dagon multiplying the fish. All the miracles, all the characteristics were taken from all these different gods in order to package him into the perfect figure to be worshipped. And then they transferred that archetype to Titus Flavius, to Caesar. And so, yeah, you're right. You caught Nick Fury. You could probably put together 3 or 4 actors and see what demographic they reach, and you'll see, yeah, these were set up here intentionally to relate to people on a certain level in order to get them to vote for the guy later.
This is like 10 steps on though, because what boggles my mind is how this starts with them getting characteristics of celestial bodies. You know, how do we get from, you know, is it Set, the moon? How do we get from there to what we have now? It seems bonkers. The journey seems illogical in my mind. I know you've broken this down before, don't get me wrong.
Sure. Yeah, no, it does. Here's what I say. I look at it more as a template, and that they just take general characteristics and then anthropomorphize them. So if you're going to anthropomorphize the sun, it's going to be the giver of life. Also harsh, because it can kill you, dehydration. You have this drama that it would be a god of life because it's essential for life. Whereas the moon would be associated with mystery, with secrecy, which is what the goddess archetype usually represents. And then you have the different planets and their movements through the constellations. And this is where you get these stories. But so it sounds convoluted, but let's look at it this way. You have this, we'll go with the sun, just because this one's really simple. Every single day, the sun goes through a journey. It's born, so it's a child, and it's on the horizon. That's the child Horus. I would say at its hottest point, at its zenith, when it's showing its full fury, that would be like Ra, when it's highest in the sky. And I think the word Ra Kit, someone pointed out, might tie into that. But then on the west, when it sets and it goes dark, and then the sun dies, well, this is the evil twin or the evil brother of the sun god, his half-brother Set, the prince of darkness, who kills the sun god. So every day he goes from baby to grown-up to getting killed. And when he's in the underworld, the sun god is worshipped as Osiris, the god of the dead, the sun god in death in the underworld, because it was like at night the sun is in the underworld. That's their concept. That's how the myth was written. But at night, the goddess, she's the goddess of the night. Her cloak is the stars. You'll see the Queen of Heaven, Mary in the Catholic churches, always has a blue robe with stars. That's the night sky. So every night, the goddess puts her dead son or dead husband back together so that they can have another kid and have another day. So she assembles his body. Set, the Prince of Darkness, didn't give back the phallus, so she puts an obelisk on him, resurrects him. So after the resurrection, she mounts him, whatever, conceives a child, the goddess of the night sky, and that child again the next morning is Horus, the sun god on the horizon, who chases away the Prince of Darkness. Like, and you see this all over, like Luke Skywalker defeating Darth Vader. You have these archetypes that they constantly play on in different forms. And so what you're pointing out here and what you're noticing with superheroes is that they're not relying on all these old gods that are expired now. They're bringing in new gods and introducing them to the people and using these archetypes to control people's minds. And it's being done all over literature, pop culture. If you read any comic book, they're all serving the same agenda.
So just, am I drawing too simplistic a parallel if I say, is it Osiris that's in the underworld? Is that right?
Yes.
So is Osiris being in the underworld, the sun going into the underworld? Is it unfair to draw the parallel with the heliocentric model and just say literally that's what's happening in the heliocentric model? Your sun goes beyond the curve and underneath you into the underworld. Is that an unfair parallel?
Exactly, because these are just very literal interpretations of the phenomenon around, written into myths. And then if you look at how different sun myths and solar myths, how they are, like there's going to be regional differences, but they have the same basic characteristics. It's always a war between the light and the dark.
It's on a side note, but thedailyplane.com made a comment about traveling to other planets, and he said that were they to travel to them, it would be just another section of the plane, if you will. And I kind of agree. I take it back, I wouldn't say that they'd be going to Saturn, but if they were to go to the moon, I think that they would just fake it and they'd just go to another section within our area, if we have one, that they could, fake the sky somehow. I have no idea. But more likely, as the Daily Plane points out, is they'd just go to a different area that had a different sky, and they'd just make up the cosmology from there. Within a couple of generations, who's going to know the difference? And take that one step further, we are that. You know, we're in exactly that situation right now. A few generations, a few lies. You know, doesn't matter if it was it doesn't matter if it was 50 years ago or 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago. After a few generations, no one knows the difference. And with us, everyone's fighting tooth and nail to keep their paradigm. Everyone wants to be on the globe, it seems. They want to embrace this heliocentric system that's foisted upon us. And when you draw the parallels like Osiris going into the underworld, it sounds comical, but that's literally what's happening in the heliocentric model. I'm glad you said it wasn't an unfair parallel, because you just don't know when you're voicing ideas sort of freely like we are. You don't know if you're talking complete nonsense, and obviously you get the commenters telling you they are non-stop. So you kind of got to check yourself and say, does this actually make sense? Is the sun going into the underworld in the same way Osiris is? And the answer is yes.
Listen, I come to these conclusions. Sometimes I come to things through intuition in my own research. And so the reason why I put off my documentary I was working on is because it occurred to me that we're seeing ritualized functional necrophilia in the Osiris and Isis myth. And I thought, okay, I can't be the only one who's interpreting it this way, because it's written in all the occult literature. And I've found instances of this being done with Dionysus, and this sex with the obelisk thing is a common facet in these ancient mystery religions. In fact, there's this chapter in this book by Sir Francis. There's this book on sex magic. I'll pull it up. And I almost don't want to read the title of the initiation rite.
Is this a pagan thing?
Yeah, do you want me to read? Yeah, it's a...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the title, I want to bring the book, because the book is about sex magic in general and Western occultism, the stuff that Crowley was into. And one of the chapters on here it's called Sexuality, Magic, and Perversion by Francis King. And the first chapter is called Dildo for a Witch. And it's about how in these covens, they would have these sex magic rituals where they're actually reenacting these things. And they actually they had some sort of ritualistic impregnation of the goddess in a ritualistic format. And so I was looking deeper into the subject, and I did find this weird parallel, because I remember reading somewhere that Jack Parsons, who was also involved in sex magic and rocket worship and all this obelisk worship, that it was rumored that he had sex with his mother. And Jack Parsons was like the Aleister Crowley in America. Like, that was his rank within this organization. And the idea of him having sex with his mother was that he saw himself as Horus, right? And It's just like there's this weird, like, not, I don't know if incest is the word. It's more like, it's almost akin to asexual reproduction, where the sun god is rebirthing himself as himself. Christians talk about it.
This is a perfect. I mean, I know you've done it already, and I know you've said it already, but it bears repeating. So you've got the system in North Korea, and it's again, if you explain it with a parallel to them, it's much easier to digest.
Yeah, because what they're saying is that this guy who's ruling over you is the guy who just died, that we put obelisks to honor, that he is literally the reincarnation of himself. That's what I mean by it's like asexual reproduction, and they constantly reincarnate. And so you see this in Christianity where they say Jesus is his father, but they're two different beings. It's like, no, that's how it gets so convoluted. It's an astrotheological cult, and they're two different beings. But if you can convince people that this guy was a god in the flesh and he just reincarnated every generation, you can keep the con going. And that's how it rolls. They have this claim, they have like a pedigree or a lineage that they can say, oh, look, this is my lineage, I came from this. And it's an old blueprint, but I look at North Korea because it's a current modern example of this ancient template in use. And Christopher Hitchens called it a necropsy, because they do believe that the Father is actually still governing from heaven. Exact parallel to Jupiter, king of the gods, governing from heaven with his vicar, the sun god, on earth. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the dictator of North Korea is functionally no different than the Pope.
Now, I'm going to ask a question that maybe will get picked apart as being a false dichotomy, but are they actually against them in North Korea because he's trying to create his own heliocentric system of sorts, with him being the god of it all? I mean, you go back maybe 100 years, and China was anything. I don't want to say China and North Korea totally different, but you know what I mean. The Eastern world was kind of separate from the Western world much more than it is today, and he's hanging on and still deifying himself and all the rest of the things. Kim Jong Un we're talking about now. Is that? Do you think they actually hate him, or is it just another reason to put war on the TV?
Well, as soon as I saw the connection between the modern day cult of personality and the ancient Roman imperial cult, as soon as I saw the parallel, I realized this is just another head of the same Hydra. And if anything, he serves a useful function because they need somebody there to keep us scared that there is a potential nuclear holocaust at any time. And so he serves a useful role as a boogeyman, controlled opposition. This is why I say, don't think the elite are Satan worshippers, because they create the devils to corral you back to them. And so I think he's part of the system. And it also caused me to re-examine all of their rocket tests, because now we know these rockets are not anything more than cylindrical blimps with a little bit of rocket propulsion and a lot of fake, fake effects, sound effects, TV, CGI, whatever they do to make it look convincing. That's a balloon. And so now we know it's just sun worship. So basically, in my mind, they're not even a threat. It's just like, okay, you got this kooky sun worship cult, just like the one that runs over our lives over here, and they all work together.
Yeah, talking of rocketry, John LeBon did a good video questioning the validity of some of their missiles and talking about the center point of rotation and the fins, and he's just looking at it basically, and it was fascinating because you look at this stuff and you think, again, I've seen on TV a gunship launch something, and that's it. I'm convinced. I've fallen victim again. And it takes somebody like John LeBon to come along and go, well, hang on a second. Let's have a look at these things. How do they work? What do they do? And you go, oh, okay. Same thing applies with Kim Jong Un. You said he's controlled opposition. So he's basically the new Saddam Hussein, is what you're saying.
I believe so. And about the rocket thing, that's a fair question to ask because, see, I was in air defense artillery, or the unit I was in. That wasn't my occupational specialty, but I spent 3 years around this new form of the Patriot missile system, and I knew all the people who worked in the system. I assisted with the field exercises and everything. But when they actually did their rocket tests with the private contractors out there at the missile ranges, only a select few were actually there. So you could work on the system for years and never see it operate. And even then, they put the missiles out in the foreground. You're way in the back with the fire control system, so you're not even seeing it except for a little blip on a radar. So they can tell you it has all kinds of stuff, but to me, it's like a big Wizard of Oz bluff. And since seeing through this thing, the world is a safer place in my mind.
And another superhero parallel. So Tony Stark, the weapons specialist, he's the guy who can see the weapons actually being assembled and built and tested in the movie. And then, of course, he sells them to the governments because he's marvelous and he makes really good missiles or whatever he's doing. But he's another archetype. He's another individual that's there to say, yes, there are people who go out and create these amazing weapons that can keep us all safe from potentially gods, because that's part of that plot line now. Tony Stark started out as a relatively realistic superhero. He's just using his armor. He's a normal guy, a bit like not like Spider-Man because he's been mutated, but you know what I mean. He's a regular guy just with armor. But as that plot line has progressed, I'm sure I've got the name wrong, but Kronos, this god that's eventually going to come, and he's going to fight with this human, and the only thing that stands between God and this human is his ability to create weapons, just like the ones we see on TV in a much more boring way.
Yeah, and have you heard this correlation between Elon Musk and Tony Stark? I mean, someone has pointed out that there's this association that they're trying to build up. Have you caught anything on that? Any articles on it?
Yeah, a few times. I haven't read any articles. I've heard it mentioned a few times. I'm sure Jaron has mentioned it a couple of times.
Yeah, because these are not coincidental resemblances, and they're worth looking at. Here we go. Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. modeled his portrayal of Tony Stark after Elon Musk. See, what we're seeing here is just the same old game. This is not just entertainment, because now that we know that entertainment is melded with government and with the mainstream media and all of their political agendas, now we know it's not just entertainment. If they're trying to if Robert Downey Jr., an insider, a piece of property, a New World Order sow, he's basically he's an animal owned by these farmers, and he's cool with it. And his role is to do whatever they tell him to do and to say what they tell him to say because he's an actor. I mean, he's talented and all that, but we have to be honest, these people are serving a useful function for government. They're propagandists. They're not just entertainers. That's kind of the big deception. And by the way, they're actors on the stage and off the stage. You never see the real person. And so if they're associating him with Elon Musk, it's because they want the people who like Robert Downey Jr. and like the Iron Man movies to relate to Elon Musk in the same way and see him as some tech wizard who's going to carry us into the next century, advance us to the next stage of evolution. And it's like Elon Musk makes dildo balloons and he worships pagan gods and puts out really poor CGI. I mean, he's like the poor man's NASA. There's no he's the reason people are seeing through a lot of the stuff, I think, because SpaceX cannot put on as convincing a show as NASA.
That may be so, but you summed up on, I can't remember if it was last night or the night before, sort of price categories for these people, and you had the gold, the silver, and the bronze. And I would call Musk and Tony Stark, these type people, they're silver. The gold people, they're very, very limited in number. But the silver are the people like these actors that are paid 20 million, 30 million an appearance and are phenomenally rich. But ultimately, they're totally controlled, so they don't probably get to use any of that money in the way that they would if we had access to that kind of cash. But they're ultimately completely bought and paid for and on that silver rung. And that you've detailed. But the bronze rung, I like, it's fascinating because the bronze rung is where we are. And we includes people who you would perhaps, if you're in the Monty Python upper, middle, lower class. No, those are all bronze, all of them. We're all bronze. And I've seen this firsthand. As you go up in money and wealth, the systems that are in place are so well structured to keep you essentially at the same level. So people have their aspirations raised because of their high income levels, and they end up with bigger houses, bigger mortgages, bigger bills. And most people going up really, really high in terms of what you would think would be phenomenal earners aren't actually that much different, this is in the Western world, to you or I. They don't have access to any better gadgets. They don't have any access to any better cars. You could say their cars are a bit more shiny, but ultimately speaking, this is the bronze category, and we all sit in it. And you can see it when they compare the salaries of the 1%ers to the rest of us. You see a graph that goes, I'll try and get it on the whole screen. The 98% is pretty much all on exactly the same level. Then you get the 1%ers. In other words, the people who are at this end of the scale are the people who, in Britain, they'd be the people on, 300, 400, 500,000 a year, which seems phenomenal. Wow, what a huge amount of money. Well, no, no, you're still in the bronze category. The people who are in the silver category, they're the Musks. They're the Richard Bransons. They're the Downey Juniors. The whoever. These are the people that sit in the silver category. The gold, I've no idea. I mean, we will probably never even see these people. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's what I've come to conclude. And this is one of my refutations against people who say the Jews are behind everything. It's like, even if all of the visible rulers, or those you can discern, and all those fill in the membership rosters of the big clubs like the Trilaterals or Bilderbergs, even if all their names end with, some kind of Jewish sounding name, doesn't mean they run the show. It means that they're the local managers, that maybe they're just like literally that, like mid-level management. And so it's useful for the gold, those at the top, those we don't see, to scapegoat these ones, and that's part of their role, and they accept it. Yeah, we're the scapegoat. We're the ones that everyone looks at, so they don't see who's really pulling the strings. And so I pointed out to people, it's like, we don't know who runs the show, so let's just focus on the psychopathic infrastructure of this thing and deal with that. And then later we can figure out if there's something else there. But it just, to me, it doesn't make logical sense to assume that the enemy that they casually present and they dangle it. To me, it's low-hanging fruit. You see what I mean?
Sure, but I mean, you said a word there that immediately pricked up my attention, because I was trying to lead it onto that anyway, which is the type of person, the individual, the characteristic. And you said that there's no royal bloodline, and you can look at it and argue the toss that these people are very, very inbred and have got quite a lot of genetic defects as a result of that. But there is definitely an elite class. They may not be in any way gods, but there's certainly people who are at the top of the tree. And I think some of them, they must be the people that are visual. I mean, I had this conversation a while back about the Jesuits, and we were talking about the Queen, and that like you keep saying, all roads lead back to Rome. But would is it the case that the people that are visible, like the Pope and like the Queen, are they still silver category? Are the golds really that hidden? Sorry to be talking in these terms, golds
No,
and
that's a
silvers.
good question. Yeah, I kind of think so. I look at them as like the CEO or something. Like they're the chairman of the board. Like we don't see the ones behind him, and it's easy to look at a figurehead. Like you've heard of the Black Pope. They say the real power behind the Pope is another office held by a man called the Black Pope. And so you do have this. It's all esoteric and exoteric. So they definitely present you with the wall of lies. But then beyond that, they definitely screen themselves behind something else. Like you don't see the Wizard of Oz till you go to the Emerald City and rip the curtain apart. You have to actually dig and dig to even see it. They're too smart to let themselves be seen in the open. Now, whether they are um, royal or not, I think it's not really a matter of them being like genetically different. I think it's just that they pass down this psychopathic system and they hand down the keys to the next person. Like Jesus handing the keys to the kingdom to St. Peter. The idea is, yeah, here's how we run the show. This is the order of things. You do not breed with the slave class. And so it's like I see them as farmers.
Yeah, I mean the psychopathic element, that sounds spot on to me. In other words, the system is what we are trying to brace against, and maybe this is something I'll touch on in the future. But a lot of flat earthers go around accusing specific people. I've done it myself, of lies. So one of my earliest videos was accusing Dr. Brian Cox of, I don't know if I did actually accuse him of being a liar. We'll see. I'll have to go and look at it again. But I think my point in the video was that he's being told what to say by the producer, and he's saying, why do we need to even? It's about the moon landing. They're going to a site. I might as well just explain it all. They're going to a site that will test the distance to the moon by sending up a beam of light, and they get a few return signals, like one or two tiny little amount from the reflectors that they were left on the moon during the Apollo program. And he's being explained this by the producer so that he can regurgitate it on camera. That's the purpose of going there. And the Brian Cox is saying, well, I don't understand, this is pointless. Of course we've been to the moon. This seems pointless. And the guy's saying, well, how do we know we've been to the moon? Well, because we've got the reflectors up there. That's the point we're trying to make here. Just make the point. In other words, Brian Cox is, again, he's just an actor. He's not perpetrating any deception. In fact, in his mind, he's going, this isn't unnecessary. I don't need to explain to people that we've been to the moon and there's reflectors up there that prove it. Of course we have. It goes without saying. The point is, he's not perpetrating any lies. But I've seen so many thumbnails that say Dr. Cox or Brian Cox lies, or liar or fraud. You think, well, no, he is perpetuating what he's been taught through the system. And the system, the matrix, the psychopathic control grid, whatever you want to call it, has been, how did you phrase it? The keys have been passed down from father to son, generation to generation, however you want to look at it, so that the system keeps perpetuating itself, so that Brian Cox regurgitates that stuff without lying. In other words, it's the psychopathic control system that we need to be bracing against. That may be protected, defended by certain individuals, but at this stage, it's certainly not being created by anybody. Nobody's intentionally trying to deceive. If you watch any of the mathematicians who are, really chuffed with themselves when they make something that Einstein got slightly wrong, when they square a circle, when they get the maths right, they don't look at it that they've fundamentally changed the makeup of the universe. They just see it as them solving a maths problem because that's their compartmentalized training when they've gone through their university or their campus or whatever. That's how they've been trained. So they're not even in the slightest bit lying. They're just perpetrating the deception that's come about through means of psychopathic behavior. And these people might have done it 500 years ago. The argument's out there now that it's much, much older than that. You've certainly put that argument in a very coherent way. But I still don't think that it's the case that we need to brace against individuals. In fact, I think that's part of the system that's been set in place. If we're going to fight amongst ourselves and start calling Brian Cox, who could be our greatest ally, literally. If he was to turn to be a complete turncoat and turn into a flat earther, wouldn't he be the best ally in the world? But he won't. If he comes to this little corner of the internet, what will he see? He'll see he's been branded a liar, and I think that's unreasonable, because it's the system that's at fault. Regardless of if it was created by psychopaths, it must have been. It's a psychopathic system, but that doesn't mean that Brian Cox is a psychopath or lying.
Okay, that's a fair point. No, that's a very fair point, because we're looking at people who are indoctrinated into a religion. So it would be no more fair to say Brian Cox is lying than to look at your nearest priest and say he's lying, because they actually believe all that bullshit.
Exactly.
That's funny. And by the way, Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole has suggested here that you don't have any legs, and that's kind of a lead-in, because yeah, you're just like Professor X. You're the Professor X. You're the Xavier of Flat Earth, and you do not have legs. In fact, right? You're you're a wheelchair-bound evil genius.
David Weiss to type that with my that's how that happened. That was actually me.
Well, yeah, for those of you who just arrived, we were already talking about... Now, what's the guy's name in Doctor Who?
It's Davros. He's
Davros, okay.
With a man's body at the top. Alien slightly, but yeah, man's body.
Yeah, okay, that's the one, Davros. So we didn't get too far off track, though, because what we're talking about for those who just arrived is how they have a process of, here's how they influence us. And I conflate the government, entertainment, and media. So they introduce something to you in the entertainment when you're young, so that you can identify with it emotionally, you have different feelings towards it. And then later, when you're older, it'll show up in the media, in a psyop, in an operation, or in a character or politician you're supposed to believe or follow, and that advances the government agenda. So what we're saying here is that Stephen Hawking he was there to fill the archetype created. He was going to be the type for the archetype of Professor X, Dave Ross, Captain Pike, and that it was done intentionally to advance this globalist idea of the human race will go extinct if we don't leave the planet, global warming. And so it's a system of introducing propagandists to you by putting them into your subconscious first. And so I was looking up Carl Jung, and if you look up Wikipedia, look up transference, and you'll see they have this down to a science. And that if you do emotionally bond with like Professor X when you're young, that archetype, you will psychologically transfer it to Stephen Hawking if he's brought to you in the same context. It's an unconscious thing.
I mean, the best one we haven't touched on at all, which is, maybe we've mentioned him a couple of times, but Superman. Because Superman is an alien. He's from another world. He's from Krypton, a planet which was destroyed. So just in the few words that make up Superman's backstory, you've got the concept of a planet being destroyed. So you've got your futurism, it's tame when you talk about the ice caps melting and the sea levels rising compared to what poor old Superman had to deal with back on Krypton. But that idea is an over dramatic version of the futurism we are given by your animatronic doomsayer, otherwise known as Stephen Hawking. And Superman, again, there's so many different things that I can remember from a child. Him reversing time, which I think the parallel universes and time travel, personally, I think that's going to make up the next big lie. That will come from CERN, but that's maybe a subject for another day. But Superman was turning the globe backwards, spinning around it, showing you suns that came up above the horizon as he flew. This guy, for me as a kid, amazing individual, but he's still a guy. It's the best way to deify your leaders is to have Superman standing next to them, because you see the real life equivalent version of that at a time of crisis, and you're going to go there. You're going to go straight to Superman. That's what you're going to see standing on the UN podium dealing with this disaster or whatever the current... God, I'm not Mr. Current Affairs. I should just have a reference there, but you know what I mean.
No, you nailed it, though. That's exactly what they did. In fact, in the 2005 Superman movie, they were using imagery. Like, for example, Superman conceives a child with Lois Lane, and the child's like, she's pregnant or whatever, and the child's sleeping. Oh, no, it's after the child's born. The child's in the crib. And you look out across the window, and you see a high-rise building, like a big obelisk, and the sun is like just setting on the thing. And then the sun's light goes into the bedroom, and it shines on the kid. And Lois says to Superman, the father is in the son, and the son is in the father. And I'm like, this weird non sequitur. and then the sunlight hitting the kid because the sun's rays, that's considered like this is, and if you get in the myth, it's the like they even had Superman flying up in space with his
I
arms
was
out
just going
like
to
he
say
was like
it needs a
crucified.
sound effect, and he's like, ah, and he's like angels
Yeah,
singing.
they identified him with like with the sun god, the savior. And the savior is the one who saves you against what? The night, the darkness. So he conquers the night. And that's the eternal myth. And that's the one that they embodied with Superman. And yeah, they had him associated with like he'd climb on the White House and put the flag back on. He went to the moon and a lot of globe programming, a lot of flying around the world and stuff, going up into space, whole lot of nonsense.
I think probably the last one we're going to touch on, because then it will round out this nicely for superhero fans if they're watching it just for that reason, is Batman. So Batman, he's gold, isn't he? Definitely. Bruce Wayne, he's gold. He owns everything. He owns a whole city. Basically he does everything Tony Stark does. He designs weapons. He embodies all of them. But he can do everything that Superman did. I've not watched Superman versus Batman, so I've no idea if the Dark Knight actually did defeat the Man of Steel. But maybe that's something for the comments. I'll put them up again in a sec. But Batman is kind of the mirror image of Superman, because he's actually a human. He's a human that's managed to turn himself into something as powerful as Superman, but from earthly origins. But he's a billionaire. He's so devoid of anything on our level that it's if you look at Batman and see anything that you can find, what's the word, if you can see anything of yourself in Batman, it's a stretch for me. I can't see anything of me in Batman. He's driving around in a Lamborghini in his real life, and then the Batmobile in his nighttime. It's just ridiculous. But that again leaves you with the impression that the elites, the gold standard of people, are the ones that will come to save you. They will defend you in the night.
Ooh, that's a good one. You're right. Good call there. Because it's all about getting you to have a dependency because they need you to need them. The psychopathic control system needs you to be dependent upon it. And that's why they always like to gut the middle class. That's why they're always raising taxes. They're calling you out on your sins, your pollution. And occasionally the oligarchs will go, they'll go full bore revolution, and they'll use like communism to just strip away the wealth and wreck everything so they can rule over slaves again. And I think that this is what their eventual goal is that they want to introduce us into a high-tech dark age where we're just a bunch of epistemological savages in a big arcade, and they tell you, oh yeah, you're on Saturn. Look at the TV screen. Those are your buddies on Earth. A bunch of Truman shows all over the place run by people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Like they're engineering this stuff, and it's just like, to me, it's just very disturbing, so dystopic. It's straight up Brave New World.
Yeah.
And the only one standing between that nightmare scenario, ironically enough, the only one standing up to that and making it even something that could be challenged in any way are the most derided people in the world, flat earthers. We're the only true red pillars. Anybody else who studies the truth movements and who looks at psyops, if they haven't come so far as to at least become agnostic about the ball, they are purple pillars. They still got one foot in the matrix.
The good thing about conversations like this is it reminds me of a conversation I had 18 months ago with Mark Knight, or Wakey Wakey, and he was saying that the globe deception was like a thin papier-mâché. You go to it and you poke it, and it's not very strong. It's only a thin veil. And the same thing applies when we're talking about these sort of control systems. I mean, we've already hashed this conversation out for an hour or so, and we've drawn comparisons for people that maybe haven't been drawn before, i.e. the TV or the global media entertainment complex, the psychopathic control grid, whatever you want to phrase it. That is the equivalent of the Bible. It's the means and the tool that people have been the allegory that we're describing with these superheroes is no different to the allegory in the Bible. And the true stories, the facts and the documented truths that the Bible holds is no different to the news. So essentially, we have the same thing. It's been transposed into a modern technological version, but where we had books, we now have the internet. Where we had priests in a church, we now have TV stations broadcasting 24/7 newsreels. And this is what we currently have for your, what do you call the heliocentric religious believers? What's your title for them?
I would call them well, I call them globies. I mean, the globies, the religion of the globies is heliocentrism, but um,
Yeah, for all you globies out there, this is your Bible, and I mean us now. This we're included, unfortunately. I've accepted a long time ago that there's an argument at the moment about people who are and aren't actors on YouTube, and I keep saying it to people, and people just don't want to accept it. We're all actors here. That's how we're defined. That's what YouTube calls us, and this is their platform. Del can't have it his way, unfortunately. This is my platform, does not apply. He's got a small little wedge of this platform, which is YouTube, and YouTube get to define exactly what we are. We're all actors, and shouldn't that say it all? I'm trying to lead you somewhere here with this. You'll see where I'm going. So the way to combat that is to give Dell props.
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Billboard.
exactly. Because they're trying to control the story, the narrative, and that's what scientism is versus science. And that's what, like, for example, in journalism, they ignore facts that don't fit the narrative. In scientism, they ignore facts that don't fit what they want the results to show. And in the same way, they can control the narrative by keeping us corralled in YouTube, and they can control this domain. So the last thing they want is for people to march off of YouTube, for the dam to break, and for flat Earth to hit the streets. And so you got people like Dell engaging people in person. You have people like Kyle McDonald protesting Chris Hadfield. And I saw this recent video. I don't know who this person is, jogging around his block, waving at people, saying, "Good morning. The Earth is flat," to other joggers. And then Starbucks. We have a Starbucks campaign where if you're a flat earther and you want free coffee, go to Starbucks. Email me infiniteplainsociety@gmail.com. I'll send you a gift card, and all you have to do is just say your name is Earth is flat when you order your drink. And that's the last thing they want. They don't want us getting out of this containment zone.
Exactly. So this is something that Dell's done so well. He's hit the streets, and it was unfortunate. I hope you two have now set aside your differences, but there's sort of no need for a turf war. Is where I was going with that little diatribe. We're all trying to beat the same drum, and if we fight over the table scraps that YouTube offer, we're missing the opportunity to do what we started this conversation with, which is meet the people off YouTube with things like billboards, with things like what Dell did. He put out a sign that said "Earth is flat, Google it," and just filmed the reaction. And that sort of stuff is absolutely what they don't want us doing. They don't want us just getting our message out. If they can keep us here, that's wonderful. That's within their control structure. So there's no harm, I feel, in saying contradicting Mark Sargent and saying we can now talk about the Earth being flat. This is a fact of life now. This is the reality we're met with daily. And for me, I don't feel it's a dirty secret to say, yeah, I don't, or disagree. So when someone mentions something in global terms, I'll say, I don't really agree with that. I don't think that's the case. And if that spans into a conversation, I don't find it turning into an argument as quick as I expect. On YouTube, however, the blazing rows continue non-stop. It's
Yep,
very
you're right.
entertaining.
And it's because it is entertaining and it's fair game. Gloves are off, but here we're mediated. We're protected by a screen and a little bit of anonymity. So it's like it's different in person. It's a little more humanized. And like you said, Dell going on the street. Well, if you look at any transactional analysis, only a small percentage of it is words. When you actually face to face, you communicate a lot more with your tone, your body language, your sincerity, and you can convey things you cannot convey through font on a screen. So there's a lot more power in that message itself when it's done in person. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as these like, channel to channel, mud flinging and whatever, we're all on the bronze. We're all at the base. We're all considered to be crap compared to the ones who built this thing. So that's why I made that one post. There are no enemies on flat Earth, because even if I don't like you, we're all part of the same meta tribe and we have the same goals and we're up against the same thing. And we're defending those little kids from this brainwashing camp they're being inducted into, like Jeff Bezos there. Jeff Bezos, he's teaching these toddlers about how they're going to go to the moon. I'm like, who let their kids around that guy? He hired Podesta to work on his newspaper. How sick is that?
And they were
You don't give your
bored,
kids to Dr. Evil.
but they were bored. They didn't look like they were paying attention.
Exactly. Which means that, and that's what they want. They just want you to go with the flow. They don't need you to think. Thinking's not a requirement because you're just an animal. You just need to believe. And flat earthers think a lot. That's something I've picked up on. These chat rooms are think tanks. I mean, the ideas that come out of them. That's why on my channel I'm going to next, I don't know if in about half an hour, we're going to start figuring out what are we going to put on the digital billboard at the Philly airport.
Very, very cool. Have you got time for maybe one last subject, which is
Sure.
along the lines of psychopathy? And I don't know if I'm going to get stick for bringing this up or not, but if we're highlighting that the control structures have come down from psychopaths, how do we deal with the exact same problem in our own community?
Ooh, good one. You know, my take on this lately has been it doesn't matter if 20 or 30% of the people here have ulterior motives, if they're agents, if they're here to disrupt things or whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as we keep pushing forward with the message, there'll be an influx of people that will drown out all of that. They don't have enough trolls to go around. The other night, I led a little friendly raid on Earth Discussions 2.0 because they normally get a max activity of 6 people watching at a time. And so we sent over 50 to thumbs down and just spam it with hashtags about how the earth is flat. And they only had 2 wrenches. They couldn't wrench us all. And I'm like, they can't wrench you all. Just keep going in there. And my point is that the more we spread out, we decentralize, we start new live feeds, and we start new communities, new content creators, all this stuff, anything having to do with ego or little unfriendly competition, it'll be lost in the mix. So I just say focus on the goal, and the rest of the stuff will just kind of fall to the wayside.
Good stuff. I'll point out that my legs are actually in shot at this stage. With that, I'm going to say a massive thank you to Tim Osman. It's been a real pleasure chatting superheroes and archetypes and stereotypes. It's been really, really good fun. I've enjoyed every minute. So thank you ever so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, likewise. And hey, I want to put a book recommendation here. There's a book called Mutants and Mystics, Science Fiction, Superhero Comics, and the Paranormal. I think you ought to read it. I read it a few years ago, but I'm going to have to do a rereading of it because when you've come to the flat earth thing, you have to reconsider some things that you looked at in the past. But it's called Mutants and Mystics. I think you would get a kick out of it. You can find it on Amazon.
Can you also give a quick plug to your channel and your website? Because there may be people who watch this who don't know who you are.
Oh, yes. My website, I have 2. I have the flatearthreport.com, which is like the Drudge Report for flat earthers. It's a news aggregator. And then infiniteplanesociety.com. And if you go to infiniteplanesociety.com, hit the blog, and you'll be updated on the art show that's happening in July and any other updates. I keep a podcast there so people are updated as to what I'm doing.
Good stuff. Thanks again to Tim Osman and to all of you who have been very politely chatting away. I've got you up on screen now, so thank you to all of you. I've not bothered to shout you all out, but I've had you on screen, so hopefully you've been reading the messages as they've been scrolling by. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and once the video finishes rendering on YouTube, comment below. I've been Nathan Oakley. I'll see you all in the next video.